Hello, everybody.
Hey,
Hello.
hello. Sorry, I realized that Benji had already flagged this to me and I still fell in the trap of the calendar has a different Zoom invite than the agenda file. So it goes. But
nobody showed up.
yeah, only actually Michael was there. So I showed up to find Michael there, and then we're like, oh, are we really the only two people who showed up nearly on time? And we're like, wait a minute. No, I bet. Sure enough, there's a separate Zoom ID. Anyhow, we'll iron out the kinks here. Well, welcome everybody to, this is the first secondary one we've done ever, right? It's also the first APAC time zone friendly one that we've done ever. And we've got some people showing up from Australia. So hell yeah.
Thanks for making this happen.
Yes, Andy, it's been way too long since we've been in a call together. And I think Donna,
nice to see you.
Is it the first time that we've met? Certainly in this context, I think, or at least a long time. And here's Michael.
Oh, there's Michelle.
Let me make sure
He's also in Australia even.
Yes, in Sydney. Yeah, it's funny. So I thought, yeah, I'm speaking at the conference here, and then it was the right time to go on this call.
I was really hoping you were going to say that you flew all the way to Australia just so that you could be a daylight hours for this call. It'd be like true commitment to the working group meetings.
That would have been a much better story. Sorry to say, but the conference is also good.
The conference is also good.
Quick,
I think we've got everybody right.
yeah, is quick just note, should we take notes in the same document as the primary document? If so, I'll update the agenda.
I think that's totally fine. Yeah.
What is Benji joining? I thought Benji is also joining or not.
I think it's hard. I will also try to join these meetings from Europe, but it's 5 o'clock in the morning in Zurich, and I think 4 o'clock in Britain. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
5 o'clock
So
for me is okay.
Benji mentioned wanting to join, and I said that I would be very gracious if he did, but he did not have to. Thank you, Matt, for spotting the notes, by the way.
I can share from experience, it's not sustainable in the long term to join working group meetings at 4 a.m. or 3 a.m.
Yeah,
it's in the long term, it's not doable. So yeah, sometimes true, but so that's why I'm very happy and very grateful that we have finally one with an Australian friendly time zone. That's very nice. So thanks a lot for making this happen.
Absolutely.
There were more people who want to join. Or actually,
I think I was a little surprised that it's just the 6 of us. I saw more support from that thread of folks who might want to show up. So that's okay. I think maybe I'll go back to the discussion thread and ping a bunch of folks and rah about how we did the first one of these, and we got good early healthy attendance, and we should do more.
Yeah.
Matt, do you have our notes doc up and running?
Yeah, you should be able to refresh and click the link. It's the same as in the primary. So if you have that one open, whatever.
Sweet. Yeah, that's good to have. Okay. So doing things a little out of order, but start at the top. I get to do my pithy. By all of us joining here, we agree to membership agreement, participation and contribution guidelines, code of conduct. links to all those in the agenda files. Some of those I wrote, those are really well written. Some of those someone at Linux Foundation wrote, those are boring. That's recorded, they're not boring. Everyone did a great job writing all of those docs. There's only a handful of us here, but we should still do a quick round of intros, especially since it's been a while for most of our Australian buddies. Let's try to go in the order that it shows in the agenda file. I'm going to post this in the chat just in case anybody doesn't happen to have it open. So there's me at the top. So hello, everybody. Lee, director of the GraphQL Foundation, and coming to you live from San Francisco.
Okay, I'll go next. Hey everyone, I'm Donna. I help out with GraphQL Java. I also work with Andy at Atlassian, coming to you from Sydney.
I am Michael Stipe, usually from Zurich, but this time from Sydney. I'm working with JCream on the .NET implementation, and yeah, that's me.
You're muted, Matt.
Yeah, I'm at Meta working on mobile GraphQL things, and I'm in New York.
Thanks for joining from New York. Hopefully it's not too late there, right? End of the day.
No, and I had to miss the last meeting because of flying, so whatever, it's fine. I'll grab some food in a minute, but yeah.
Hey, I'm Philip. I work for Red Hat on the GraphQL extension that we've built on top of GraphQL Java, and that's the code used in Quarkus and OpenLiberty for IBM. It's my first meeting, so I'm basically just here to listen.
Yeah, that leaves me. Hi, everybody. I'm Andy. Working on GraphQL Java still, maintaining it today, these days together with Donna actually, and Brett, who is not here today, and yeah, still working at Atlassian. Joining from Brisbane actually, this time from Australia.
I feel like we've got solid Australian representation here today. Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane. We got like,
yes,
the corners.
But there's nothing else really. Oh shit, that's recorded. But these are the three biggest cities in Australia. This is what I wanted to say.
Yeah.
Did put a health warning, everything is a joke. Don't take it serious.
Lee, just for especially the our new people, this is not only recorded, but this will be also published on YouTube afterwards, right? Like just making everybody aware of this.
Yeah,
So,
that's right. I should probably write that in as like agenda item 0 in all of these docs, as to like a reminder for everyone that we do record and publish these on YouTube. And so, or a reminder to myself to make sure that I don't tell untoward jokes about the quality of the docs that people have written or something else. Yeah. Next, we usually look for a note-taking volunteer. Matt, sounds like you have, in assembling the notes doc there, become the initial volunteer.
Yep.
Hopefully that was something you intended to do and you weren't just pointing out a missing gap. But if everyone, Matt kindly put that notes doc in the agenda file at the top of the file. You'll see live notes. There's a link to a Google Doc. And if it doesn't work, reload the page because he just added that in there in the last few minutes. And so especially if Matt chimes in discussion, if anyone would be willing to jump in and help take notes along the way, that'd be super useful. I think I will probably skip previous meeting action items. I wonder if that's something that, I'm thinking about this now, makes the most sense for only the primary meetings.
Yeah, that's also a thing. I'm not sure about how we do that, because like there's the main meeting where we have a lot of discussions on things, and you cannot just hand this over to other people to complete. I don't think that will work. Like if we have deferred discussions on the main meeting, because Rob is there, and then have other discussions on the same topic, I don't know how this will work out. So there,
That's true. Maybe what we should do is, to the degree that we spot actions to open here, is to flag which meeting they came from as like a GitHub tag on them.
Yeah.
That way, when we open up action items for this meeting, we can look at like just APAC time zone ones. For the Europe specific one, secondary one, we can look at just that one. And then we can look at
Yeah.
all of them in the primary meeting. And so, you know, if something falls through to the primary meeting, like that's okay. The goal there is to just make sure we don't miss anything that we've said we wanted to do. But probably better than just straight up skipping action items. But this is the first, so obviously we have no previous meeting action items from previous ones of these.
Yeah, we probably, right, if we have action items for specific people, because a lot of the times they're tagged for specific people, it might be worth
Mhm.
going through to see if anybody in this meeting is tagged, besides you, probably.
Mhm.
But yeah,
That's a good call. There's usually not like a huge amount of those action items, so maybe that's actually the simplest thing that works. It's just to like, we'll open it, we'll scan it, and anything that's not relevant for the particular group in the meeting would just pass over. I'm happy with that. I like that. So my other thing I wanted to kind of just flag was just like timing for the meeting. My goal was to kind of block on calendar enough time that if we ever have like a lot of overflow or a lot of stuff to discuss, which I think is more important for this meeting than it is the Europe friendly time zone secondary. Because this is like the primary way in which, if you're in an APAC time zone, that you've got the opportunity to get like live time. But my expectation is that like we probably won't fill the full hour and a half all the time. And so like right now I see we have like one major topic to get into that we maybe spend a half hour-ish on. That seems like a sweet spot. Like I expect that most of these will have like one or two major things to dig into. And that'll be great. So the 1.5 hours more of like a upper threshold pressure valve. Like we're going to definitely hard stop at that line, but hopefully most of the time this ends up being more like 45 minutes to an hour-ish.
Yeah.
All right, let's jump into custom scalar implementation. Andy and Donna, this one's yours.
I have a little bit meta questions about topics. I'm not sure you want to discuss this now or after, but
We can do
one
that now.
question that came to my main question, one question that came to my mind was a little bit about, okay, if we have a topic that, for example, we bring it up now in the APAC meeting, is this like, should this also be covered in the other meetings, or are other interested parties kind of forced to join the APAC meeting if they want to contribute something about it? You know, like
yeah. Yeah, so I think one thing that this is making me realize we definitely need is a report back step. So I think this is something that we should add as like a standing agenda item to the primary meeting, is just a quick, like it basically like an agenda review, 5 minutes. What did we talk about in the two secondary meetings? I think we should just probably always do that. In addition to that, if there's anything that is like a specific request, like we want to get a proposal in front of more people, we want more feedback, something that needs like a clear action, then I think what we need to do is make sure that there's some like co-champion for a proposal, or there's just like someone who's going to be able to do that. And so if you don't have that right off the bat, like this might be a good forum to like ask for a volunteer. So like Michael, Matt, and myself are in the primary meetings as well. And so like if there was something in this custom scalar implementation that you wanted to specifically get feedback for and make sure that we highlighted, that goes above and beyond just like letting people know that this existed and that they should take an opportunity to go look at it, then making sure that you fold one of us in to carry the torch forward is probably the right way to do that. But very good flag on the like, how do we make sure that everyone's aware of what's going on across multiple meetings?
Yeah, so it's good. Like I didn't expect a perfect plan. I just wanted to make sure that we think about it a little bit. And so yeah, having like a report back, I think is a great first step.
Cool.
Okay. Yeah, we thought like Okay, we have a first APAC meeting, so we should contribute also a topic. And actually, we have a topic which we worked on. When I say we, I mean primarily it was Donna and me. So we teamed up and looked at custom scalar specifications again. I have no presentations, I have no real outline, but I will talk a little bit, and please feel free to ask questions or let's discuss stuff. I give a little bit background also. Maybe somebody will watch this again online. I'm not sure, but I will give a little bit context even for people who are not here. There was a discussion 3-4 years ago. Basically, it came out of a real life need in Atlassian, but also in other places that, okay, there are non-trivial custom scalars. For example, datetime is one of the most popular ones, which are not easy to get right across different implementations in every detail. And one of the things Lee and I actually looked at it at this time was, is it possible even, or is it somewhat even desired to define maybe more scalars inside the spec, like a datetime scalar implementation, additionally to the 5 ones we have. And one thing that we realized quite quickly was that while possible, you have the huge burden of existing conflicting implementations across the ecosystem, and especially with more complex one like datetime, there's surely no agreement what it really means. So there was back and forth, and we ended up going in a little bit different direction and adding the specified by URL directive. So you can now specify a URL for a custom scalar, which should point to a stable web page describing the custom scalar. So that was kind of our indirect way of being able to talk about custom scalars implementation without actually forcing a specific implementation at everybody. And yeah, this was all fine. This is merged, I think, 2-3 years ago now. Looking back now, I must say I have not seen a custom scalar specification in the wild outside of what I wrote for datetime.
The main problem here is, and I'm pointing for datetime, I'm pointing always to GraphQL dash scalars. But the main problem I see is that it's not something from the GraphQL specification. Like, I think it would be better if these things would be on GraphQL.org, and that there is a central point. We guide people, like there's, for instance, from the guild, all these scalars for long and stuff like that, or money and things. There are a ton of scalars that they wrote. We actually ported them to .NET, but these could all have specifications. But it's not, for the most people I talk to, it's not. And there's no visible central station to put these things.
Give me 5 minutes, I will come back to this.
Yeah,
that's definitely something I want to discuss. So yeah, I will come back to this. These are all good points, but we see 2 challenges with custom scalar specification. First of all, it's actually quite hard to write a good custom scalar specification because the mental model, what a custom scalar does in detail, is non-trivial. Especially, like, again, Lee and I worked like a year ago, 2 years ago, time flies, I'm not sure, on, for example, one specific extension that allows translating from a literal to from an external value or raw value to literal, to support custom scalars in all aspects. This is like just one detail, and it's very specific knowledge that I don't see widely adopted across all implementations, and especially people outside of the people who maintain them. This knowledge is very obscure and very unclear. So we sat together, Donna and I, and we decided we try to tackle this problem in 2 fronts. And I will come back at the second part to what you said, Michel. It's like, first of all, is we want to simplify or want to provide guidance for people writing custom scalars implementation. So we want to come up with a quite easy, understandable template that references, we called it now an implementation guideline. So you should have a clear mental model, what a custom scalar does and what is required for an implementation, blah, blah. But this is a static document. And on top of this, you can reference this basically, and you only have to do minimal work to define custom scalars. This was the rough goal. And then the second step of it, this comes back to where do you publish this and where do we want to publish it? And actually we did some work around this again multiple years ago. I think Lee might remember. So we have a GraphQL minus scalar repo actually already in the GraphQL GitHub org, which was always intended as a publication channel, so that people could contribute custom scalar specification and they will show up on graphql.org. To quickly jump into one detail that will come back very lately, people will surely ask, I mean, like the goal is not to be an authoritative thing about every scalar. It's more like every person can publish their own specification on a central place. So for example, I can publish my datetime implementation, but if Donna disagrees, she can publish her datetime implementation. So it would be like a namespace place, but it will be hosted under graphql.org/scalars or spec or scalars.graphql.org, something like this. And additionally, it should have like a common format, a common template that you can easily understand and compare custom scalar specs. This is kind of the vision. We had this vision very broadly years ago, but well, we are all doing this voluntarily here, and so we never got around to really make this happen. But now we found some time, and we worked on the first step specifically, and this is what we want to present a little bit, is we wrote a custom scalars implementation guideline. It's linked in the agenda. It's a markdown format that's hopefully still readable, and it talks about custom scalars, what to think about, how to think about implemented, clarifies a few things around what is the raw value and literal coerced value, stuff like this. It also points to an interesting thing that the official, like the spec for the built-in scalars is not the clearest part of the spec, to be honest. Like the scalars description in the spec could be improved also as a follow-up, we believe. Yeah, but this is the first part. We want to get this implementation guideline out, and we also have examples how the spec would look like for the built-in scalars. So if you use this implementation guideline, how would you define a float or an ID? And we have actually examples of this. And then the second step, which probably comes later, it would be exactly what Michael said, like we want to publish it on graphql.org. Yeah. I thought I'd talk a little bit longer. Now we have time. Any questions or discussions before I show maybe a little bit what we did in more detail? But is this clear? Is like any major concerns, anything that goes against what we else doing? Yeah, happy to talk about it.
I'm still a go. Like, I think the way you articulated the plan aligns directly with how I've been thinking about it too. I think it's just a matter of someone needs to just do it, and something, especially like your framing is right here, like our quality threshold doesn't need to be quite as high as what we would usually hold for most of our other work. Because right now what we have is, I think you're right. Like we basically have nothing. Like there are very few cases where people are pointing at a common, well-defined scalar spec and using that specified by. We have the mechanisms in place, we just don't have a ton of like examples of where people can point. And I think what you're framing here of like having a template that has, here's the questions that you need to be able to answer to be able to have like a decently specified scalar with like a moderate threshold. Like I think anyone should be able to publish these anywhere. They should be able to copy the template, stick it on any website, you're good to go. And so that gives us some license to have a little bit of like a code review process rather than just rubber stamping everything that shows up. But we don't need to have formal approval by a working group or a TSC to get it in. Like we could just have a handful of trusted delegates to say, this looks good, or this part of your proposal doesn't make sense. Fix that so you don't have something confusing. And make sure that stuff that shows up there is like decently quality or better.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm not thinking about a semantic review so much. It's more like more, do you pass some formal and some ethical review stuff. We don't want to publish offending stuff, for example, or like things
Right.
that goes against the code of conduct. So
that's obvious. That's the floor.
Yeah, so this still would involve like a manual code of manual review, and we don't expect also thousands of people to show up. This will be still a limited group of people who would take advantage of it. So having a review process, a manual, is still scalable well enough in my world. I would be happy if 10 people show up in the next 2 years. I would put this under success.
I think the main thing is visibility. Like the people from the guild, they are motivated, so they do a lot of these things. But I think it's at the moment it's not visible that there is something like this. Like we all like. There is no guide, or there's no hint that there is somewhere where I could publish my scalar, right? If I didn't know that GraphQL scalars exists, when I tell people about that, nobody knows. And also the specified by is a detail in the spec. Most people don't even know that the scalars have added that. So that needs a place where we explain that. But yeah, and then I think there will be more people who publish.
Yeah, I'm imagining like I mean GraphQLscalars.com, that was like the original thesis of that, right? Which is like super high level, describe what it is, point to the spec where you need to point to the spec, and then just list out all the ones you got.
Yes.
What do we need to move this one forward? Is this because it seems like we've got pretty broad consensus that basically anything we do here is going to be useful, and there's not a lot of opportunity to get it wrong, like because we're in a state where no one is really paying that close of attention. If we get something up and running, we're like, yeah, it could be better. It's like, cool, we'll fix it, make it better, and eventually get to the point where we start to see people using it, and then that kind of gets dialed in.
Let me show you a little bit what we got, and I think from there we can talk a little bit how we want to take this forward. I will not go in every detail, but I will take advantage of that we are the only topic at the moment. So let me show you a little bit if that's okay.
Yeah.
Where we are. Okay, so this is the original work I did years ago on GraphQLscalars.com. It still says work in progress because I was never totally satisfied with this kind of spec. This is a datetime scalar spec which stands alone. So it introduces certain naming, certain mental models, and at the same time it defines what a datetime scalar should look like. Not bad, but it would not allow for a clear template to emerge from it. It's very unstructured overall, and it's usable to read as a human, but I was not happy that this in some way is like templatable, if that is a word. And so we came up with two different things. We have now implementation guide, which is basically how to think about custom scalars and what do these different terms mean. And this is a standalone document. Let me actually try to get this up a little bit. Yeah, it talks about serialization and deserialization again, observability, coercion, result coercion, input coercion, literal raw input value. It has this nice picture that is very important for the input coercion, how to think about these things. It sets the frame, let's say it like this. And what we found is when you have this document, which is not specific to any custom scaler, it clarifies the mental model and the constraints you have when implementing a custom scaler. Then what we found, what you actually only need per custom scaler is, and that's not so well formatted here, but what you actually only need per custom scaler is 3 things on the core. Of course, you should have a little bit explanation, you should have maybe some references, but ultimately every custom scaler spec only needs 3 things. It needs a definition of the literal input values that the custom scaler accepts, and for example, this is for the built-in scalars here. For example, the ID scaler accepts as literal input a string value or int value literal, so that there's no restrictions to it. So this is all what you need. And then what you need additionally is the JSON raw input. So this is the variables passed to a GraphQL request. In which way can you represent a custom scaler as variable? And because the only real specified serialization format we have in GraphQL is JSON, so this is expressed as a JSON value. And so here an ID can be any JSON string. And then the result again is when a scalar is used as output type. Again, the only observable serialization, deserialization format we have is JSON. This is why we specify it also in JSON. And we say an ID scalar can be any JSON string as a result. So this is quite simple or trivial maybe because they are the built-in scalars and there's not a lot. But for example, the float one has actually some interesting aspects. It takes the float value as literal input, and then the JSON raw input, again, these are the variable values you can pass into request. And there are some interesting details about that the JSON spec actually does not specify the range of a number. So, but the float value in GraphQL does it clearly. So there's a potential conflicting point which should be clarified in a spec. And the result of a float again is a JSON number. Again, there's also things around it excludes nan and positive negative infinity, while the JSON values could include this in theory, as I understand it. So as you can see, this is kind of the core for custom scalar spec would be talking about these 3 different things: literal input, JSON raw input, JSON result. This is kind of all what you need. And the template we are thinking about is basically maybe some introduction, talking about these 3 different things in detail, and then maybe some reference section also. This would be the template we talk about. And as you can imagine, the daytime version would be much smaller now. Like this, again, this mixes mental model and introduction of topics with the actual spec. And we would have much simpler point. We would have just like this table and maybe this one and a little bit introduction here why RFC 369 is not sufficient. So it would be much more structured and much more convenient to read and would follow the template. Yeah. And so our suggestion is basically using this kind of template on the GraphQL scalars GitHub repo, and maybe we need to spend a couple of hours to kind of build a simple publishing pipeline with Ali. This is a little bit where you come into play. Like maybe you want to prefer, or maybe you want to be consistent. We want to use SpecMD there, you know, make like a SpecMD pipeline that is consistent with the other ones that might be good, not just using like what is this here, React or whatever. So these are some details to talk about, but this is what we have. Happy to take criticism or ideas.
There's definitely like 2 very separate problems here. One is like, what is the right template to give people? What information do we need to have a good scalar proposal? And then the separate is like, how do we build the website where these things come together, which would be nice just for, visual consistency to use SpecMD, or like if you want to, actually the thing that's quite nice is that it allows you to make it, or it makes it easy to back reference. So you can set up references from one spec file to another spec file. And so that's pretty good.
Also, there's a maintenance aspect to it, maybe that we don't want to have multiple different configuration build files pipeline across the org, So this is why I'm very happy to align with what we have.
But appreciating the fact that there's a separate novelty piece here, which is like aggregating a bunch of files and having a build step for each, and like having a main page that pulls them all together. And like SpecMD doesn't do that for you, so that would be a new thing to go build.
Yes.
I think your frame here of like what are the important things are the right ones. It's like you need to define literal inputs, value inputs, and value outputs, which does not necessarily need to be JSON for what it's worth. It just needs to, I think you need to describe the fact that there is a way to send a value in. And then you should also probably, like in the common case that you are using JSON, here's the preferred way that looks.
So this is where it's interesting. Like when we work through it, I believe it actually has to be JSON, because we don't have a way to talk about other things in an implementation neutral way. So this is the observability aspect. I know what you mean, and this doesn't have to be JSON as serialization mechanism, but the point why I call out explicitly JSON is because we don't have anything else. Yeah, but it's important because you need to have a format which is actually understandable across implementation. This is where the JSON aspect comes into play. This is a little bit explained more here on the implementation guide.
There's another way that we could consider kind of speaking about these, which is if I imagine the majority, but not all, but the majority of custom scalars are actually a subtype of an existing scalar. So datetime is a subtype of a string. And so rather than saying like, here's how you serialize this as a literal and the JSON they put an output, you'd be like, it's a string. So like, if you want to see how you manage strings in GraphQL, go look at the strings chapter. But then the contents of the string have to map this particular DSL, which is defined by, the RFC 3337 or the particular chapter within. And so that way you're like not worrying too much about serialization and deserialization. It's just like, it's a string. Let me tell you the encoding of that string. But I appreciate that not all scalars will fit that model. Like if you wanted a, arbitrary JSON blob type, that was like, that must be a JSON because it's the definition of it. And that may be something else. Matt, you had your hand up.
Yeah, so there's a couple interesting things here. So one, I do think it is high value to specify at least the JSON, unless you can back reference and be like, in JSON, this should be the same, whatever you choose as string, it should be the same. Like 64-bit int, can't do that. So now that's
but like there's a difference between a 64-bit int is a number that is defined by 64 bits. And then when you're serializing it, for example, in JSON, like you don't necessarily have to say like you are not a 64-bit int if you're not in JSON, because like that doesn't really make sense. But like acknowledging the fact that 99% of GraphQL uses JSON serialization in and JSON serialization out, then obviously we have to speak to it. It's like acknowledging the fact that a JSON number cannot be the subtype in which you use that.
An interesting aspect of this, though, is that as long as we get the scalars all defined for JSON, including our existing GraphQL scalars, that's almost entirely to the point of if you wanted an alternative mechanism, all you need to do is take all the scalars, JSON input, output, whatever, and explain this is going to be the format in this other, like if we had flat buffers, for instance, like, okay, what would a string look like in flat buffers? What would a int look like in flat buffers? It would be like 32-bit. If you had a custom 64-bit in flat buffer, it would be this. And like having that one-to-one comparison would allow us in the future to build like to build clients and servers that can just, you know, toggle switch.
1000% agree with that. It is if JSON, then it must be this, not it must be JSON, unless
Yes.
like the literal type is explicitly talking about some JSON type, in which case, like, sure. But if it's like 64-bit int, is like, okay, you don't have to be doing that in JSON, but if you do it in JSON, it must be in this format, like 100%. That makes sense.
Yeah, if I understood you correctly, Matt, you want to have like a different serialization spec for different formats. So we have in the official GraphQL spec a JSON definition, how things are represented in JSON, right? And if you want to define your scalars in protobuf or whatever, you would have like a definition how GraphQL is serialized and deserialized in protobuf, right?
It's almost more that your scalar definitions and your template, like if you use SpecMD, your site that explains for JSON, these are the scalars, these are custom scalars. For the default JSON, this is what you do. Yeah. Somebody could entirely describe another format and just like launch another GraphQL serialization, deserialization format merely by walking through that list and implementing that description for each scalar. In addition, you would need then in addition objects. So this is almost a like series. It's very close to not just scalars definition, but rather like serialization, explicit serialization. Serialization requirements per method. I don't know.
Well, so how I would see it is you would have to duplicate this format in a different, like, sorry, this chapter, the section of the spec in a different format. This is what I would think about it. Like, if you want to duplicate this and talk about, maybe not, well, both of them probably, and you want to talk about how is GraphQL mapped into serialization format A, then you can definitely write custom scalar spec referencing this different serialization format. But I think there's like this observability aspect to it. Without a serialization format, you can't really talk about custom scalars because it's inherently some part of the implementation, and you need to have an observability channel, if that makes sense, to talk about it. This is why JSON came into play. But yeah, I agree with it. It's nothing exclusively. There's nothing fundamentally that says it's only JSON. Yes.
And so, like, I appreciate that we're being a little nitpicky here, because at the end of the day, if you're one of that like very small portion of people who are using a serialization that is not JSON, then you probably have already figured out like the boundaries of what that means. And the overlap between that and the overlap between people who are trying to use custom scalars in the way that we're trying to empower them to do is like probably zero, right? Because like what we're trying to do here is create ecosystem effects. And those ecosystem effects all assume GraphQL over HTTP and JSON serialization anyway. So just to say that I'm sorry to have wasted your time on this topic. But I think we're narrowing in on like we can like fiddle with the particular words in the template, but like compacting it down in terms of 3 bullets, I really like. You need to be thinking about literal values in, deserialized values in, that's JSON, and like here's what the JSON looks like, and then serialized output values, which again probably JSON, in which case here's what your JSON value looks like. Like that's a good 1, 2, 3. But my thought on a decent portion of custom scalars will be subtypes, is to like maybe there's a templatized section above or section below of like what is the format of the thing. Like datetime is actually a perfect example, because the thing that you don't want to encourage people to do is write out like all this details of how to parse a date time and like a literal value and then repeat themselves in the JSON deserialization, because the goal is to make them as similar, if not the same, as possible. And for datetime, they should just be the same. Like there's nothing special about that string value, aside from the fact that it like meets that particular like RFC 3337 DSL. And then you can have like a one sentence on each, which is, this is a JSON string which follows this format listed in the chapter below. This is the JSON string, you know, and then you're like, okay, chapter, here's the like specific sub chapter of RFC 3337 that we are filling in.
So yeah, definitely. If I understood you correctly, I also see a point in providing a simplified templating or straightforward templating for narrow down string values, and datetime would fall into this category. Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
This could be even simpler and more direct. Yes. I want to point to real life example we experienced. Why all this like this body of work or this thinking about and getting this mental model right is important. First of all, we actually had incidents involving different datetime implementations that cause problems in production. So that's a real life experience. And then second example is probably all, or at least all implementation of what I saw of JSON, for example, of the JSON's custom scalar is actually has tricky or impossible edge cases. For example, a JSON scalar allows for hyphens inside a key, like, sorry, a JSON object, a key can be hyphenated, and a JSON, sorry, a GraphQL object literal does not allow for hyphens in the name. So like the possible namespace of literals does not map directly to JSON namespacing of keys, which is a subtle problem, but which we also encountered in real life. So we had a JSON value coming in, and that has as a key, for example, my minus house as key, and then we wanted to map it into an GraphQL object, literal, and we wanted to write my minus object as a name or as a key of this object, and this was not a valid syntactic literal in GraphQL anymore. So that's quite a subtle thing that, again, yes, edge casey, yes, not a lot of people will encounter it, but I think it's important to get this right. Also, if you truly want to support this kind of things across ecosystems. Just to give you two things where we are coming from, why we invested so much time in getting it right. Yeah.
That makes sense. And I think like probably like a good steady state, like how we'll know we're in a good shape, is to have like two fairly different kinds of custom scalars as like clear examples to pin towards. And then also the template, because if the template just says fill in these three major things, you're like, great. But they also kind of want to know, like, mine is a little bit weird for this reason. Like, can I look at another one? And the two primary domains of weirdness is explicit subtype of string, which is datetime, which is what motivated all of this in the first place, which we ought to just put up. And then also like probably the JSON type, or maybe something similar. Maybe 64-bit int is another good one. Something where there's like some subtlety that needs to be clearly defined. That's like very clearly a different kind of thing from a datetime. That would give like a great, because you know some people want to look at examples to pull from, and we can set like a decently high bar for making sure that those look pretty good. Because whatever we put up, people are going to copy.
Yeah. No, totally true. That makes sense to have simplified versions, and not everybody will need the full version. Yes.
Cool.
The question, the question would be, okay, we have this implementation guide, we have a idea of the template. What would be maybe the next steps? How do we want to take this forward? Like, it's
From my point of view, you are unblocked to just ship something. Donna, I just added you as a collaborator alongside Andy for that GraphQL Scalers account. Let me know if we need something in particular to set up domain routing or anything like that. Like, but if we have a website clearly working, but at the wrong domain, like that's a great step in the right direction. We'll get the domain stuff figured out. But I think like probably the next step is actually like getting the mechanisms of some variation of SpecMD and a index page generator, and like with GitHub Actions all wired up so that you could just show up and send a pull request with markdown file, and once it lands, it becomes a URL that you can point at. I think that's probably the next step. And if that's something that you all feel like you're ready and willing to be able to go do that, then like, sweet, make it happen. And if there's something there where you need support or help, then feel free to like bring that back to the group. One thought I had, if you are in a situation where you need help, is knowing that the next batch of the GraphQL community grant is going to open up sometime soon. One of the things we didn't do last time, but might be interesting to do this time, is to write like rough briefs of like what would be a good thing to apply for. And one of them is like, hey, we got the Scalers project. You want to come build a website for us? I have no idea if anyone will bite on any of these, but if in case you need help, then that might be one avenue to gather that help.
Great.
Yeah, like I think, yeah, thanks a lot for this, Lee. I think Don and I will look into what we can do with the time we have and resources and effort we can afford to make something shippable in terms of producing. My question for the people kind of going back to the other working group meetings would be sharing maybe a little bit the implementation guide. I'm pretty sure some of our more spec-affine colleagues like Benji also would like to have a look at it and maybe all of you give it a review if you have time. So looking for feedback in this term, because we kind of define or clarify certain things that are in the GraphQL spec, and maybe the terminology is not completely what we want. Even if we put effort in to make it nice and consistent, it's still tricky. And so, yeah, any feedback on this would be also appreciated. I don't think it will change the fundamental layout, what we need to define for a custom scaler, because it's still these three things. But yeah, having feedback on the implementation, that would also be good. We will probably add it to the GraphQL scalers repo itself soon, so that it can be better commented on or looked at. Or what do you think, Donna? Does it sound good? I talked a lot. It was really a team effort. I wanted to point this out here. Without Donna, we would not have this state here. So
Fine, Andy. I'm happy to let you talk.
I'm just excited to be in a working group meeting again after so long time of absence. It reminds me a little bit of the first. It's a little bit of the first one, which were really a much smaller group, and we had much more. There was no agenda to read and items, and it was much more unorganized in the beginning. So yeah,
that's true. We've really dialed it in since then. Awesome. Yeah. Well, so I've added both of you as. Andy, you've been on that repo for a while, but Donna, you're now a collaborator on that repo too. If you spot anybody else who could be useful that you want to add, just let me know and I'll get them added.
Yeah, so
otherwise, feel free to go nuts.
Sorry, the TCS group already has, I think, admin rights across the whole org, which includes this repo, I believe. So Matt,
correct,
Michelle, everybody should have already access if you want to do stuff. Yeah.
That is very true. In which case, you probably have plenty of access controls in the case you need to add somebody yourself.
Yeah,
which
I think so. I think down the road, probably, hopefully we get there, but there's probably something to figure out around subdomains and stuff, but this is a little bit further ahead. If we ever get there, I would be very happy. But until now, I think technically we are very unblocked and we can ship things, yes.
And where is that SpecMD and the existing documentation?
I will drop a link in the chat, not
Thank
to
you.
disrupt this amazing conversation about encoding. There's the website for the SpecMD. And that's the tool that we maintain to format the GraphQL spec.
Great.
And yeah, the rough idea is to kind of leverage this and produce similar documents and similar pages. I don't know, does SpecMD produce a web page out of the box, or is there stuff around we have to do?
It does, yeah. If there's any feature adds that you need to make to it, feel free to get started on them and let me know. Happy to edit stuff, but right now it's sort of like a black box where you give it a markdown file and you pipe it out to an HTML file that you're going to put it in, but it's just like a command line tool that takes markdown in and HTML out. So hopefully easy to just like write a for loop over all the markdown files in a folder. And then there's like a separate net new thing, which is building sort of the aggregate, like making an index page that lists out all of these and points to each. But it probably makes sense to just have the template in the exact same folder. That way you can like see how the template renders on the website. Simplifies things a bit. And then you can have an index page that's just, I would imagine the index page would introduce what a custom scalar is, point to the relevant parts of the spec that you need to while doing that introduction, and then explaining that the purpose of the website is to collect scalars and give them canonical URLs. Here's the list. If you want to add your own, here's a link to the GitHub repo. Done.
Yeah, sounds
Sweet.
good.
I'm glad we
So-
talked about this. Yeah, this has been sitting a little stagnant for a while, but if you both are ready to inject a little energy back into custom scalars, I think that'll be very good.
Yeah, I want this done.
We try to, like, on a, maybe my personal motivation to do this is also, I truly believe that custom scalars are very under leveraged feature of GraphQL because of the missing spec aspect. And I always had the vision of an ecosystem of custom scalars that supported in graphical in some way, that are supported across ecosystem, which really which scales much better than the built-in scalars, adding stuff to the built-in scalars, and that was always the vision of the specified by also. So I think this ecosystem of scalars, custom scalars, is really, I hopefully that will still happen, because at the moment we recommend often custom scalars not to use too much because they are so poorly supported in everything, the tooling does not know what to do with it, to generate code for it, to validate it. And if we have more around this, that would be awesome. Yeah.
I think this is the other half of this problem, is like getting them documented in one place is great, but then getting them used in the primary tools that people use is, I think, the other half of the battle. It's like we go there next. And I'm remembering that like full cycle, the reason why we get on this was because we tried to get a definite date time type, and then big surprise, no one in the world can agree on dates or times, like classic programmer problem number one. But if we had, a top couple of them and had them integrated into Apollo and Relay and Graphical, where we're like, I see you're using this particular variant of the datetime spec. I've automatically set up the like date encoding for you, or like I've set up validation for you. It's like you would start to see the real value of having used the specified by tag there. And it would also like pattern match the, right, okay, this is what it looks like for those teams who maintain those tools to make use of them as well. So that's like, I think phase 2. We'll get there when we get there.
Yeah, I would love to get to that point.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I think that's from our part. I don't know, Donna, if you want to add something, but from my part, it was like that's all we wanted to discuss.
Yeah, you covered it. Yeah, that's all I wanted to cover today.
Sweet. that's our agenda for today. If all we did was go deep on this one thing, then I feel good. We had like no pressure to stop early to move on to the next thing, and we've got a little bit of time left over. So I said we'd be here for roughly an hour, and here we are right at about an hour from where we kicked off. I think we did it. All right, folks. Thank you for making the first of these a success. I hope to see you at the next one, and invite your fellow GraphQL collaborators to come join with interesting topics.
Yeah, thanks a lot again for the first Australian one, and hopefully see you soon.
Absolutely.
Cheers.
All right, friends. See you in the next one.